Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. And please come in. Feel free to go at the back as well. I'm sorry they've put us in the minuscule room this morning. But thanks so much for joining us for this side event on legal regulation in Europe. So this event is being organized by the Norwegian Association for Humane Drug Policy, FHN, and co-sponsored by Germany, Czechia, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, the International Drug Policy Consortium, the International Network of People Who Use Drugs, and Amnesty International. My name is Marie NOUGIER. I'm the Head of Research and Communications at the International Drug Policy Consortium. We're a global network of NGOs that come together to promote drug policies grounded in social justice and human rights. Please feel free to come in and go at the back, squeeze in basically wherever you can. So before I start, and in the name of many of our members at IDPC, I'd like to express solidarity with the Palestinian people as they face an unprecedented humanitarian catastrophe. We urge member states to uphold international law and prevent further bloodshed with concrete action, which includes an immediate and permanent ceasefire, the delivery of humanitarian aid, the end of occupation of Palestinian territories, the cessation of arms transfers that could lead to further violations, the release of those arbitrarily deprived of liberty against international law on all sides, and credible commitments towards peace and justice. So today's event is on legal regulation, and that continues to be the elephant in the room at the CND. And yet, the legal regulation of certain internationally controlled substances is now reality for over 300 million people around the world. So more and more jurisdictions in the USA, in addition to Canada, Luxembourg, Malta, Thailand, and Uruguay, have now legalized cannabis for recreational purposes. And Bolivia has legalized its coca market 15 years ago. And an increasing number of jurisdictions are currently considering bills for the regulation of cannabis, and that includes Czechia, Germany, the Netherlands, Portugal, South Africa, and Switzerland, just to name a few. The 2023 report of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights also encourages member states to consider legal regulation as a way to eliminate profits from illegal trafficking, criminality, and violence. So legal regulation is on the table, both nationally and internationally. But legal regulation also poses two key questions. Firstly, not all legal regulation models are equal. And there is a need to have a serious discussion as bills are being discussed and approved on how legal regulation can redress instead of perpetuate the serious harms that have been caused by prohibition, especially for marginalized groups, so that models that are established can really truly promote health, social justice, racial justice, gender equity, and avoid the risk of corporate capture. Secondly, the legal regulation of internationally controlled substances is creating tensions with the UN drug control treaties that we're quite aware of. And instead of simply ignoring this fact or wishing that the problem will just go away, there needs to be a serious discussion on how to review the treaty regime that is clearly out of sync with the realities on the ground. And so that's why we're here today. Basically, this side event is really just about creating a space among civil society, policymakers at national level, UN representatives, academics, journalists, to have a frank and honest discussion to talk about legal regulation. So we've got an amazing lineup of speakers today, and the first panelist is actually my dear colleague, Anne FORDHAM, who's the Executive Director of IDPC, and she's going to deliver some brief introductory remarks.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Marie. And IDPC is delighted to be a co-sponsor of this event. And thanks also to the other co-sponsors for organizing it. Yeah, they gave us the smallest room in the house, which I think is a sign of currently where this conversation sits within Vienna. But a room nonetheless, which I think is really crucial. It has been difficult to open this conversation, not just here in Vienna, but also, I think, in many other jurisdictions around the world. And of course, in Vienna, the conversation around legal regulation, I think for about a decade now, when we first started really discussing it, it was all based around cannabis. And even then, those of you who were here probably 10 years ago when Uruguay was moving to regulate their own cannabis market, it was so controversial just to talk about the idea that we might legally regulate cannabis. I remember the same year, the Global Commission on Drug Policy released a report also about responsible regulation, which was, really groundbreaking. And they also called for the responsible regulation of all drugs, which was incredibly controversial. And I think we are genuinely starting, that report was really before its time, because now we're really starting to have that conversation. And I think, as Marie has mentioned, even at the UN level, we've now arrived at a point where a UN entity, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, has taken that step and recommended responsible regulation. And I really want to note that last week, to have the High Commissioner here himself, Volker Turk, in person, was an incredible milestone. It has taken 20 years of advocacy from civil society to get a High Commissioner for Human Rights to come to the CND in person. And almost at the last minute, his invitation was rescinded by certain member states here in Vienna. So we're very, very glad that in the end he could deliver his remarks to the plenary. He also said in the high-level event organized by Colombia and Bolivia very clearly, and I quote, "We need a more responsible and humane regulation of the drug market to eliminate profits from illegal trafficking, criminality, and violence. But we also, I think, need," these are my words now, "legal regulation because of the market itself." And I just came earlier just now from an event on synthetic drugs that we also co-organized, and the discussion there was really clear. Synthetic opioids, these drug threats that the US is deeply concerned about, rightly so, because of a devastating overdose death crisis that they face. It's not that these drugs are dangerous in and of themselves. Fentanyl is used in medicine every day when people know the exact dose that's meant to be given. It is an important and safe pain medication, but it is the unregulated nature of these markets that means that the drug supply is toxic, unpredictable, and therefore deadly. So also from a public health perspective, we really need to be having this conversation, and I'm delighted that we are. And also we'll hear later about the mayor of Amsterdam, who held a conference in January that was really focused around the regulation of cocaine and around MDMA, really breaking that taboo of saying, we're not just going to focus on cannabis, we really need to talk about other substances. So yeah, I'm really delighted that we're having this conversation today. I'm so glad that you could all be with us. Thank you, Marie.
Thanks so much, Anne. And actually, fantastic transition towards our second speaker, PIETER WALINGA, who's from the city of Amsterdam and who is going to tell us a little bit more about this Amsterdam conference on legal regulation and also the Amsterdam manifesto that came out of it. So PIETER, you've got the floor.
Thanks very much. My name is PIETER WALINGA, City of Amsterdam. Well, you said speaker, but I have a short movie to show you. I'm the program manager that organized the conference for our mayor, and we made a short movie that, in a nutshell, shows what the issues at city level are and what was discussed at the conference. So please start the movie, and I will talk after that shortly about the next steps we're willing to take.
Legal regulation is the only solution to the growing power of organised crime.
The goal should be to take control.
We want a regulated market, not an uncontrolled market.
We can't go on the way we did for the last 50 years. Olivier is Commissioner for the Southeast.
Good morning. A very warm welcome to you to Dealing with Drugs, the Quest for Legal Regulation.
We've witnessed more than half a century of a global war on drugs, and it hasn't yielded the desired results, which is to eradicate the global drug trade.
Isn't the definition of insanity to do the same thing over and over again and expect different results? What we can see worldwide, in Europe and in the Netherlands, there's more violence. There are more drugs on the market. Our economy is getting infected. Our justice system is overloaded. So we need a change. We can't go on the way we did for the last 50 years.
One thing became clear to me is that no matter the size of the police operation, the number of police involved, the size of the market is never reduced. It remains the same. Has any policing activity actually made our communities safer? Reduced crime? It hasn't.
Organised crime has grown as a result of drug prohibition. It makes it more ruthless, more effective, and much more powerful. The only solution is to take legal control of the drug market.
The purpose of the conference is forming an international coalition of the willing, of people who want to collect facts, collect alternative solutions, where not repression is the central focus point, but public health, protecting our citizens, protecting our youngsters, protecting people who use drugs.
We have problems in public space, we have crime in public space due to that war on drugs. The nations will never act because they are not confronted with the problems. The problems is on the ground, is on the field, is in the cities, we see it in public space, that's why we have to act.
We are all concerned with the violence, the corruption, the health issues. So I'm glad we're having this conference and putting this debate into a more open and honest discussion. To take this topic away from taboo, from misinformation and from fear.
What I'd like to do is just give an overview of the kind of conceptual thinking around regulation of drugs, and then a kind of brief overview of what the regulation of cocaine might look like.
Als genotsmiddelen worden gebruikt, dan moet je het goed organiseren. Want als jij het niet goed organiseert, dan laat je het eigenlijk over aan de criminele markt. En daar hebben we de afgelopen 50 jaar gezien wat het leidt in Nederland en daar zijn we niet blij van geworden. Wat heel erg goed is dat we het debat voeren. En hopelijk levert deze conferentie met alle voorbeelden ook uit het buitenland daar een belangrijke bijdrage aan.
The Ecstasy Shop is an art installation done by Poppy, a drug museum in the making. And we want to generate that debate about if we would regulate ecstasy, what would the conditions of sales be? Like marketing, like how many pills can you buy? And that's something that we want to engage the general public with. So that's why we're also here at the conference with our Ecstasy Shop.
It's a really groundbreaking and historical event. I don't think we've ever seen a discussion at this level. And yeah, this is not a conversation about whether we move towards legal regulation. It's not a conversation about if we should do it. It's really a conversation about how we do it and what the next steps should be. And I think that's really incredible.
That was the conference. It was about a month ago. And after the conference, our mayor asked us to go some steps further and to define a good agenda for this topic. And that's what I'm going to do for our mayor, and I can speak about that after this event, of course, with all of you. But for now, I think it would be wise to have a short moment to look at the manifesto. Normally at these conferences you have a closing statement, but we decided we wanted an opening statement and to write a manifesto that people can agree on. And it's an open manifesto. You can find it on dealingwithdrugs.org, and maybe some short statements from the manifesto will make clear what's in it for short. And you can find it online. It's not that long, and it's quite. It has been endorsed quite a lot, but we also have the ambition to get more cities on board, and especially because Amsterdam is a city, and we are looking at the problems at city level. We try to find more cities to agree with the manifesto, trying to strive for more experiments, more possibilities to. Work together also on the national and international levels, of course, with groups of cities to try to make the next steps toward legal regulation of drugs. JINDŘICH, question?
Do the cities have to be capital cities, or can it be like second largest in the country? Because
well, you've seen the mayor. You've seen the mayor of Bern. I'm not sure if it's the capital, but it's the capital. Okay. Well, no. Any cities, of course. These are some.
Kilometers from here.
We'll talk afterwards. These are some statements, and I think it's good to know that from a mayor's and the city's perspective, it's never just one reason to strive for legal regulation, because mayors are in the center of different problems, and they see also from the perspective of law enforcement the trouble they have from crime fighting, from health perspective. And our mayor has said, well, I'm convinced that legal regulation is something that we need to find out if it's going to help us in these different aspects of the discussion. And you will see it here, maybe for the next one. This is one of the things that, especially for mayors who are working on fighting crime at the same time as they are responsible for health issues, that they see legal regulation as one of the possibilities to get to make the market smaller. It's not going to work in a way that there will be no crime anymore, and that's one of the misconceptions that has been happening a lot in this discussion, that people say, if you regulate, there will just be other crime. It's about making the criminal market smaller. It's very easy crime to deal drugs. If there's no easy crime, some of the people will do other crime, of course, but other people will have normal jobs and do other things with their lives. So it's about diminishing the drug market. That's one of the things that's very important, but it's always not just about crime, it's also the health perspective, the harm reduction. And if you want to regulate, you have to carefully find out if experiments can be done in the cities with regard for all these issues. You have to design them properly. You have to be very wise in that. You have to be scientifically based. And I think that's the only way to find steps and design experiments and trying to get the room for from national governments as well to be able to have these experiments in the cities. And we're now aiming for Warsaw in December, trying to find more cities to endorse the manifesto, trying to find more cities to be on board and maybe also designing experiments and talking together about their experiences with these experiments. And together we'll be an informal movement of cities trying to make more possible in this discussion. I invite you all to write, to endorse, of course, our manifesto, or at least read it and know what the discussion is really about.
Thank you. Thanks so much, and please join the group. So, as I mentioned earlier, there are various bills under discussion in various countries across Europe, and one of them is Czechia. So we've got with us JINDŘICH VOBOŘIL, who I've known for many years now. So he's the National Drug Policy Coordinator of Czechia, and he's going to tell us a little bit more about the bill in his own country and maybe elsewhere in Europe as well.
Shall I speak about the bill? Yes, because I had something different prepared. Doesn't matter. It's okay. Yes, I'm a national coordinator in Czech Republic, or Czechia. It's not Czechia, it's not Chechnya, but it's Czechia, but I prefer Czech Republic. It's easier to remember. And I'm in charge of all the fun, yes, alcohol, tobacco, gambling, and all the drugs that we have currently illegal, and of course pharmaceutical products, etc., which lead to addiction issues. Yes. So talking about the bills, we have now two things in the parliament. Well, one thing in the parliament, the other one is in the government in discussion. We have a bill in the parliament that's going through second reading now. And it's aiming to regulate currently unscheduled substances such as kratom or AHC. I was surprised of the reaction of the cannabis community against it. I have to say it was not very welcome, because there is already growing beginning of the business behind it, and now we want to, instead of prohibiting or regulating substances such as AHC. But it's in the parliament, and the idea is to strictly regulate rather than prohibit. We'll have two new lists, empty lists, next to the prohibited scheduled substances. And that list will, the first list will be temporary. Any new substance coming to the market will be taken off the market at the beginning, but not under criminal sanctions, but under the food regulations, with some kind of scrutiny and some kind of risk assessment. And afterwards, there was going to be a decision whether we put it, leave it on the market or put it on the regulated list, which is the second empty list. Or it might still end up in the list of the banned substances. And I don't want to go into details what the regulation is going to be. It's going to be very strict, but only very simply, it's going to be specialized shops. Of course, only sell above 18. The people who will run those shops will have license, and if they break rules, the license will be taken away. Similar to liquor shops, for example, there's things like that. Czech Republic is a country with a big problem of alcohol. We are the country with the highest consumption among underage as well. And the law to not to sell to underage is just broken everywhere. It's impossible to enforce for many reasons. So I'm also aiming at showing that we can work in different substances. And I'm quite confident that we have all the means and possibilities to show we can work. So actually it's quite conservative, even though I'm seen as extremely liberal at this moment. So the other bill is already drafted, but it's not in the parliament yet, and that's about cannabis. I don't want to go into details, but the first bill is an open possibility to actually any rescheduled substances, and we'll see where it takes us. The funny thing is, when I put it in the parliament and it started being discussed in the parliament was very positive, and all of a sudden a big campaign came, not against the bill, because the discussion was so how much? A couple minutes. Was so well received, so the campaign was targeted to me. And of course, I do because I'm with 6 prime ministers, so I do my homeworks and I dig inside. So I was accused by media that I am first that I'm going to legalize cocaine, and behind the scene that probably I am involved in the cocaine in the cocaine market. And then that I am obviously making money from AHC, kratom, anything. Yes, and it went to the highest levels. So we had an argument in the government about it, and I started digging with my friends from Secret Service, and of course there is money put in this campaign. So what I'm actually saying by this, I don't feel poor thing. This is not the first time I experienced this. But what I'm actually saying that we have fearful enemies, and these fearful enemies are not only political ideas or ideology. Ideology is easy to break, or not easy, but it is possible to break. But when you have industries behind it which are against you, when you have globally organized crime, which is led by the highest level of people in totalitarian countries, they have billions, they have good market research, but they also have people in different positions that owe them. That's what we fight in. So we can preach to the converted, we can even persuade many people, but from the political arena, my experience is, of course, maybe some countries may be less corrupted, some are more corrupted, but as we learn from the war situation, how many people are involved with, for example, Kremlin and bought by Kremlin, which are in governments such as Germany, or where in governments such as Germany or Austria or other countries. Of course, it's in Commission, it's in the Czech Republic, it's everywhere. So today we're learning that this is a little bit more deeper than we thought, and these people benefit from prohibition. You start from pharma companies. Of course, they because a lot of those products compete. Continue with alcohol business. You look at, of course, the organized global crime. So in Amsterdam, I was reading some passages from declassified CIA reports, which are there. And publicly, you can open it, and it's there, and the names are there. The very famous names, like the Mr. Ivanov, who was the Russian anti-drug coordinator. Okay. But also you have the businesses that are behind the police. Now there's billions put in those activities in ports. The only outcome we can think what the outcome will be. There's billions put in it, billions of euros put in it from taxpayers' money. Of course, there are a lot of businesses behind it, people who produce cameras, who produce IT businesses, etc. A lot of people live from it. It's impossible almost impossible to stop this. So unless we name it very clearly, and that's a different level of fight. We're talking very much here human rights, and it's important. But we have to name these particular issues, otherwise you cannot stand against it.
Thank you so much. And I mean, I think the Czech Republic's example shows the level of political courage it requires to bring this to the table, both nationally and internationally. So we're gonna switch gear now.
I'm not a billionaire. I don't even have my own car.
Right. So we're going to switch gear now, and we're going to move to another country experience, which is that of Sweden. And I'm really happy to welcome Johan Wilken. I think it's WICKLEN, sorry. It's your first CND as well, I guess. Yeah. So Johan is actually a journalist from Sweden. He's an award-winning reporter from the country, and he actually wrote a book. Is it available in English?
No, sorry.
Okay, so please learn Swedish and read that book, because it's fascinating and it explains the failure of the war on drugs in the country. So yeah, Johan, please, you have the floor, and he's going to share a bit about the experience of the country with us.
Yeah, it's time for a bit of a detour now down memory lane, but hopefully I will tie it together in the end. So we come back to the subject that is being discussed today. Thank you, John, Arild, for inviting me. Tack Föreningen för Human Narkotikapolitik. So in 1978, the Swedish Parliament decided that all drugs deemed illegal were foreign to Swedish culture and could never be accepted. They had to be eliminated. This marked the start of the Swedish restrictive drug policy and was followed by the 1984 goal to make Sweden a drug-free society. The driving philosophy behind this vision was that drug supply was secondary and demand was everything. The user was both the problem and the solution. This also marked the start of a long campaign where an alliance of anti-drug crusaders, parent groups, police, and mostly right-leaning politicians lobbied to criminalize the use of illegal drugs. In 1988, this became a reality, and a couple of years later, the law got even stricter. Police now had the right to take people's blood or urine to prove that someone had been using drugs. The law was implemented at a time when other countries in Europe moved toward harm reduction policies amidst a raging HIV epidemic. But Sweden took another stance. And the official police slogan in the late 80s and the early 90s was simple and clear. It must be hard to be an addict. Zero tolerance was the way. Only solutions that corresponded with the vision about a drug-free society had a place at the table. Of course, money was being spent on treatment, but it was almost exclusively on so-called drug-free treatment. Harm reduction was off limits simply because that would be equal to giving up and sending a signal that drug use was okay. And what would the next step then be, a Swedish politician asked? A discussion about legalizing cannabis? This was also a time of extreme consensus, which no doubt led to censorship. And the few scientists that did their job and put forward valid critique got put into a sort of intellectual quarantine. In my book, I tell the story about one of these professors. At a conference arranged by the health ministry, he got attacked and booed just for asking if cannabis really was as bad as heroin and if Sweden really should deny clean needles to people that use drugs. When Sweden joined the EU in the middle of the 90s, drug policy was heavily debated. Holland was the big enemy, of course, and Sweden started and funded organizations like European Cities Against Drugs, which worked to spread the Swedish model around Europe. Around the same time, a Dutch criminologist, Tim Boykoit van Solling, traveled north to write a book about the Swedish drug control system. Like many outsiders, he was surprised, even shocked, that a country known for its modern, humane, progressive welfare social politics had such a harsh look at drugs and the people that used them. He also noticed that Swedes became very un-Swedish as soon as drugs came up for discussion. Let me quote, "When the Swedish drug policy is criticized by foreigners, something very deep and fundamental seems being touched. Where Swedes are usually rational and calm, when drugs are discussed, rationality seems very distant and emotions get the upper hand, which in the Swedish context and in the light of their debating culture is very unusual. A foreigner criticizing Swedish drug policy can trigger violent reactions. In many ways, this still implies today. But looking back, we can see that no one adopted the Swedish drug policy. And in the late 90s, we were clearly further away than ever from a drug-free society. But reform would come, at least in some ways. In 2015, me and a colleague interviewed the High Commissioner for Human Rights about the lack of evidence-based treatment for people who use drugs in Sweden. Her stance was clear. Sweden simply didn't live up to human rights in that aspect. Since then, though, things have changed. Needle exchange programs are spread around the country. Medication-assisted treatment is now considered the first choice for opioid use disorder, and the way politicians talk about this issue is way different than just 10, 15 years ago. If morals earlier triumphed over practical and theoretical knowledge, politicians today actually listen to researchers. But this is only partly true. If we divide the Swedish drug policy into two tracks, where one is treatment and one is control, it's obvious that treatment is where progress has been made. When it comes to control, the story is way different. As many of you have heard, Sweden is now ravaged by shootings, explosions, and gang crime. What some scholars call drug policy-related violence. But when other countries, for a variety of reasons, reconsider prohibition, Sweden now doubles down. Not only have politicians from left to right said no to investigate if the criminalization of drug use is a good or bad policy. But the same politicians also have reignited the war on drugs. Last year, we both criminalized intent to buy for possession and introduced mandatory minimum sentences of 6 months in prison for selling as little as a gram of weed. And even if a person sells to finance their own misuse, which is not uncommon among people that use heroin, it's not a mitigating circumstance. Of course, both drugs and crime are heavily discussed in Sweden at the moment, but does this lead to a drug policy debate? No. Instead, when the subject is being debated, the focus once again is put on users. Stop using drugs is the message, a very, very simplistic slogan to combat a very, very complex problem. But Sweden is not an isolated island. Around us, things are happening at a rapid pace, which we heard today. In a world where prohibition has been king, people are exploring responsible legal regulations to promote human rights, health and security in Europe. We see countries experiment with different cannabis policies. We see politicians talking about regulating other drugs, such as cocaine. We see the topic of safe supply being discussed to combat the overdose crisis. All interesting subjects that I, as a journalist, follow as closely as I can. But what then could Sweden bring to the table? I would argue that Sweden is equally interesting. In this kind of a new world of drug policy laboratories, Sweden has an obvious place, once again being a stark contrast to more lenient approaches to drugs and the people that use them. And with that, thank you for your time, and don't take your eyes off Sweden.
Thank you so much. Okay, so last but not least, I will give the floor to our final speaker, who is also one of my drug policy heroes. So Arild Knutsen, the director of the Norwegian Association for Humane Drug Policy.
Thank you so much, and good morning, everyone. I'm so glad that you're here, and I'm so glad for you panelists and IDPC and all the co-sponsors that are empowering our drug user organization from Norway. Thank you. And this is so important to us because the drug policy, we've been discussing this drug policy for 18 years in our organization, and it's about harm reduction, it's about decriminalization, but it is the prohibition that is the great answer. And since the 1960s, when we got this prohibition policy, what has happened? Well, we got a wave of human rights violations against indigenous people, against people of color, against women, against people with other sexual orientations, against people that are farmers that are producing the drugs, poor people, human rights violations about vulnerable people as such. And we got a wave of open drug scenes, overdoses, injecting drug use, a wave of marginalizing, putting people in such vulnerable situations that our societies, we don't do that in any other level, in any other group of people. Put them in such marginalizations, such health conditions. We don't care about their life. We don't care about their dignity. We don't care about how many people have died. This is an evil policy, and it's like you said, it's the totalists. It's the gang violence. It's those kind of environments that runs this kind of politics, that are being empowered, get money from it, and so we got a wave of HIV infections, hepatitis C infections, and then we got a wave of harm reduction. That came very, very slow up from the bottom, and they can't even pronounce harm reduction up in the stairs here. It's so controversial to say harm reduction. What is it? It's about saving lives. It's about preventing viruses. It's about giving people inclusion, giving them an opportunity to stay alive and live the kind of lives that we others do. And they can't even say that harm reduction equals human rights. And then we have got this discussion now in Norway about decriminalization, because we shall remove the stigma. The criminalization hinders people from seeking help, receiving help. And they say that it will stop the stigmatization of people. Well, that decriminalization is about police running after us in the streets, but then they take the drugs from us, but then we're not going to punish you. We're just going to force you to go into there to get help. How is that destigmatizing? It's not. It's the prohibition that is the main problem. We have to end this taboo. We have to break the taboo and move forward, because this is a totalist ideology. When we open up, you don't have to be drug liberal or anything, but just consider now there's less people in the world since it hasn't been so few since World War II that are living in democratic states. We are Europe. We are for democracy. And now we have an enemy against the democracy inside our own countries because of organized crime. They're killing journalists. They're killing politicians. They're killing advocates. They're killing people just passing by because they don't care about people's lives. In Sweden, in Netherlands, in France, in Germany, people are coming to people's homes to murder them. They're bombing houses, bombing, shootings, killings, and they are infiltrating political parties, infiltrating the welfare system to launder the money. They are infiltrating the political parties. They are infecting our economy, and they're destroying the trust to our banks, to our democracy, to our politicians. They're destroying our democracy from inside. We cannot do that anymore. And what we can do, if you're afraid of drug liberalism or anything, you can open up for those who use the most drugs. I think there maybe 10% of the drug users use 70 or 80% of the drugs. Well, make it legally available for them so that the organized criminals don't make their lives or their environments from this politics. I won't talk too much now because this was a kind of hippie-like attitude before. Everybody considered us idiot liberal, drug liberal, but now we're seeing a break in the discussion. Now we're so happy about the manifest from Amsterdam. We're so happy about the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights that are open up to consider legal regulation. And we have this distinguished guest in the room, ZAVED Mahmood from OHCHR. Could you please say a few words about that? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Tusen tack, Arild, John, and beyond to organize this event and also inviting WCHR to co-sponsor or support this event. With that note, I would like to highlight that yes, you're right. In the report, we have addressed this issue. In the report also, we mentioned that current drug control policy have primarily taken a punitive approach to suppress the market in illicit drugs, and many countries have adopted repressive policy with consequence and impacts of human rights. In the report, we outline what are the human rights consequences of the current drug policies. And the recommendation which High Commissioner has approved and in the report is provided is based on our findings of the human rights impact of the report. In the report, with regard to recommendation, we recommended shifting from punitive drug policy model towards policy that promote health and human rights, and which is crucial to dealing with the cultivation, production, sale, and control of drugs. The key recommendation with regard to that, adopt alternative to criminalization, zero tolerance, and elimination of drugs, i.e. drug-free world, by considering decriminalization of uses and responsible regulation of drugs. So I don't want to elaborate this further. Already you have heard from High Commissioner in his 2 statements delivered at the high-level segment and also at the high-level event, one high-level event, and also he clarified that what means by that. And we would like to see that member state take on this report and recommendation and initiate the discussion how to achieve that. Thank you.
Thank you, Arild. Thank you, Zaved. I think, yeah.
A few copies of the book, summary. Please take if you wish.
Thanks, Zaved. And there are more where? Upstairs? Or?
In my bag.
In your bag, okay. Come see Zaved. So, I mean, it's clear that the discussion right now is really about how we can legally regulate and not why. So I really hope that we can continue that discussion. We still have 4 minutes. So if there is any burning questions or comments from anyone in the room, feel free to raise your hand.
My name's Clemmy. I work for Health Poverty Action, and I also work on environment and drug policy. So thank you so much. I really appreciate the beginning to map out who benefits from prohibition. And this makes me think your point about trying to reduce the size of the market, because in other areas, there's a whole principle of just transition where people are moving communities that work in fossil fuel heavy industries to green industries, and they are privileged. If they've worked in the fossil fuel industry, they're then privileged into the new industries that are green economies. I'm wondering, have the panel considered how do we transition the people who work in the current illegal market into the new legal markets? Because there's always going to be the baddies at the top, okay, or what, like the organised crime groups that we're never going to be able to transition, like you said. But there's huge aspects of people, there's huge groups of people that we're going to need to privilege into the new markets. And I'm just want to know, how does that what does that transition look like? Have you looked at other cities like New York who have done that in a different way with racial justice and the appreciation of those communities that have been harmed by prohibition? So yeah, transition and also a focus on livelihoods. This question about legal regulation is about livelihoods and how people make a living.
Good morning, Maria Alejandra Vélez. I'm from Colombia, a professor of economics at Los Andes University in Bogotá, Colombia. I was happy to see my former mayor on in your conference, and I was wondering, there was a discussion around some form of international trade of cocaine market in which Colombia could produce legal cocaine, because if you guys start regulating cocaine, well, cannabis, but cocaine, without consider the producing countries, then we are out of the distribution of benefits of the regulation. So I was wondering if that was a discussion in the conference.
I'm from the United States, working police lieutenant. I'm with the Law Enforcement Action Partnership. And what I'd like to do is put myself out there as a police professional. If you need anybody to have a voice to have police reimagine their roles in this brave new world that is coming, I'd like to make myself available, okay?
Well, shortly, we are at the beginning of designing these experiments, but we're thinking about a global market. So I think in respect to both questions, these are things we should take into account. And there is, of course, internationally a lot of experience with that when it comes to cannabis markets or other markets that have been legalized. And it's true that I think the only way is to get people involved that are already involved in the markets, but it's very tricky to do that, of course. So I'm willing to learn from experiences. I'm also here to hear from people about these experiences. And when it comes to designing experiments for cocaine regulation, it's from production to distribution to the use to the harm reduction to the prevention. All aspects should be taken into account. So yes, and willing to talk with you.
Thanks so much for these important questions. I absolutely agree that we need to be talking about a just transition, because it's not as if the market doesn't already exist, and we need to transition that existing market into a legal space, not just create something new. I think to the point about, a globally just approach to make sure that, the farmers in Colombia are also able to participate in a global market. I think it's a really important question. It does bring us back to the question of the international drug control treaties, because even with cannabis, currently legally regulated markets of cannabis are closed systems where cannabis is produced domestically for that recreational market, not imported from traditional grower countries, particularly in the global south. So it's a really important question of the global social justice reparations around legal regulation. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne.
I'll be short, yes. Maybe. No, it's going to be difficult because you have different kind of products. Cannabis people can produce in different countries. You produce indoor. So you start from the beginning. It's not such a problem. But when you regulate heavily, then it always plays in the hands of monopolies and big companies. Because small farmers, small companies, small distributors always end up being bought or destroyed by regulations with the bigger players. That's always difficult, and that's not only in this kind of field, and it's in other regulated fields. If you look at pharmacies, pharmacological products, or alcohol, tobacco, same thing. You have 4 big companies in the world. How many countries produce tobacco? But how many countries produce cigarettes? Only 4. The big ones, yes, the one that have world monopoly, unless China or Thailand says, okay, we have government monopoly and that's it. So alcohol similar. It's so complicated. But I have some small example now in the new bill that's going through the parliament. The substance that we want to regulate is kratom. Even though WHO said we don't need to schedule it, some of the European countries already banned it. So we said, no, we don't want to ban it, we want to regulate. We have 4% of population, thank you, 4% of the population under 35 using it regularly. So we don't want to prohibit it anymore. But now we have a ongoing kind of bilateral G2G conversation with governments of Thailand and preparing government of Malaysia, and it's going to be more difficult in Indonesia, which is the biggest producer, but they have no legal measures. Thailand is actually the only country that has any legislation for kratom to be used for human consumption. So it's so complicated. So I'm looking at some bilateral contract between or treaty between Czech Republic and Thailand, and for example, trouble is how to ship it, because there are countries in between. There is a ban, yes. So it's going to be similar with cocaine. So it's going to be millions of details which are going to be uneasy to resolve. But I'm sure that if the governments want to support, cut the money flow to organized crime and terrorist organizations and people who open the war zones now, then we have to cut the current ways. We will have to. It's no other way.
Thank you. Johan and Arild?
A fast one. Yeah, cocaine is the hard one. If you want to bring in the original countries in the trade, you almost have to legalize it globally, I think, but I could be wrong there. Cannabis is a bit easier, but if you want to see a case study where it's been hard, then you can look at California, which was the big producer and is the big producer of cannabis in the US, both pre and post legalization. And it's been really hard for a lot of small producers, maybe producers that have been growing cannabis in generations, and all of a sudden they are cut out from the market and they have to do something else. while big companies come in and scoop it up.
Right. Thanks so much, guys. Thanks so much, everyone. I think it's exciting that we are now at CND and we're talking about legal regulation. And I'm very thankful for the government officials who came here today, because I think a few years back, this room would have been filled with NGOs, yellow badges, very, very few red badges. So thank you for coming, for having the courage to actually have this conversation here at CND. We need to continue having the conversation within these walls, outside these walls, in Amsterdam and elsewhere. So thanks for coming. We'll be here again next year with other exciting events. There's many, many more this week. Reach out to our amazing panelists and have a wonderful day. Thank you.